Welcome back. This is Lecture 26, Gram-positive versus Gram-negative, what it means in practice. Last lecture, we touched briefly on the bacterial cell wall and mentioned that it is exactly what the Gram stain reacts to. Today we go deep on that single test. It is roughly 140 years old, it takes about 15 minutes to run, and it is still the very first thing most microbiology labs do to an unknown bacterial isolate. By the end of this lecture, you will understand exactly what causes the color difference, how to run the procedure correctly, and why that one result changes how an organism gets handled from that point forward. Here is what we will cover today. Number 1. You will understand why the Gram stain is still the first test run on almost every unknown bacterial isolate, 140 years after it was invented. Number 2. You will know exactly where the cell wall difference lies, and why that structural difference is what produces two different colors under the microscope. Number 3. You will be able to walk through the Gram stain procedure step by step, and explain why timing the decolorization step is the most critical part of the whole test. Number 4. You will understand why the difference matters in practice, endotoxin risk, disinfectant resistance, and how it can point an investigation in the right direction. Number 5. You will be able to recognize which Gram-positive and Gram-negative organisms you will meet later in this level, and why they get grouped that way. Let's start with a bit of history, because it actually explains a lot about why this test has survived so long. In 1884, a Danish bacteriologist named Hans Christian Gram was trying to make bacteria easier to see in lung tissue taken from pneumonia patients. The staining method he developed did something he did not fully expect. It split bacteria into two clearly distinct groups, based purely on how their cell walls reacted to the stain. He almost did not publish it. He genuinely thought it was too simple a technique to matter. He was wrong, and here is why this test has survived unchanged in its core logic for a century and a half. It's fast. You get a result in under 15 minutes. From smear to microscope, which is far faster than any culture-based identification could ever be. It's cheap. A handful of basic reagents and a microscope. No specialized equipment required, which is part of why it is still standard in labs everywhere, and it narrows the field immediately. Splitting an unknown isolate into Gram-positive or Gram-negative cuts the list of likely organisms roughly in half before any further test even runs. That is an enormous head start for an investigation. Now let's get into the actual biology. Because the color you see under the microscope is not random. It is a direct readout of the cell wall structure. Look at the diagram on this slide. On the left, Gram-positive. On the right, Gram-negative. Gram-positive organisms have a thick peptidoglycan layer, roughly 20 to 80 nanometers, sitting right on the outside of the cell membrane. That thick layer is what physically traps the crystal violet dye inside the cell during staining. There is no outer membrane on top of it. Nothing extra to get through. Gram-negative organisms are built completely differently. Their peptidoglycan layer is thin, only about 2 to 3 nanometers, and it is sandwiched between the inner cell membrane and a second membrane on the outside. An outer membrane. That outer membrane carries lipopolysaccharide, or LPS, sitting on its surface, which we will come back to shortly. During staining, that thin peptidoglycan layer simply cannot hold onto the dye the way the thick Gram-positive wall can. This is the entire mechanism behind the test. One structural difference in the cell wall, and it determines every step that follows. Let's walk through the procedure itself, step by step. Step 1. Fix the smear. You heat fix a thin smear of the culture onto a slide. This kills the cells and adheres them to the glass so they survive the washing steps that come next. Step 2. Crystal violet. This is the primary stain. At this point, every single cell in the sample turns purple. Gram-positive and Gram-negative organisms look completely identical so far. There is no visible difference yet. Step 3. Grams iodine. This acts as a mordant. It binds to the crystal violet that is already inside the cell and forms a larger complex, one that is much harder to wash out than the dye alone would be. Step 4. Decolorize with alcohol. This is the critical step, the one the entire test hinges on. Alcohol dissolves the Gram-negative outer membrane and washes the diiodine complex straight out through that thin peptidoglycan wall. Gram-positive cells, with their thick wall, hold onto the complex and stay purple. Timing here is everything. Leave the alcohol on too long, and you will start stripping color out of gram-positive cells too, giving you a false result. Step 5. Counterstain with safranine. Whatever cells lost their purple color during decolorization pick up this pink-red stain instead. Cells that kept the crystal violet stay purple, since safranine cannot outcompete a dye that is already locked in place. Those final two colors, purple and pink, are what you actually read under the microscope. Now let's look at what this actually looks like in practice. Take a look at the two photos on this slide. On the left, a gram-positive organism, staining purple to violet. On the right, a gram-negative organism, staining pink to red. Staphylococcus aureus works well for the gram-positive side, since it shows the characteristic grape-like purple clusters clearly. E. coli works well for the gram-negative side, showing pink rods. Once you have seen both side by side, you will be able to read an actual slide at a glance. One important note before we move on. The color reflects what happened during decolorization, not the shape of the organism. Both gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria can be cocci, bacilli, or other shapes. Shape and gram reaction are two completely separate pieces of information, and you need both to properly characterize and isolate. So why does any of this matter beyond just producing a nice purple or pink slide? 3 reasons, and they all have real consequences. First, endotoxin risk. That outer membrane we discussed on gram-negative organisms contains LPS, also called endotoxin. It triggers fever and inflammatory responses in humans, and it does this even from dead cells, which means killing the organism does not eliminate the risk. This is exactly why sterile and parenteral pharmaceutical products are specifically tested for endotoxin, using the LAL test. Second, disinfectant and antibiotic resistance. That same outer membrane acts as an extra physical barrier. Many gram-negative organisms are genuinely harder to kill with the same disinfectant concentration, or the same class of antibiotic that works reliably against gram-positive organisms. This has direct consequences for how you validate your sanitation program. Third, root cause direction. In environmental monitoring, gram-negative isolates often point you toward water, drains, or moisture as the contamination source. Gram-positive isolates more often trace back to personnel and skin shedding. In a real investigation, the gram reaction is very often your first clue about where to start looking. Let's look at the gram-positive organisms you will actually meet later in this level. Staphylococcus aureus, cocci arranged in grape-like clusters, covered in Lecture 33. It matters because of toxin production and because it commonly traces back to skin or personnel as a source. Listeria monocytogenes, short rods, covered in Lecture 32. You already know this one matters because it grows even at refrigeration temperature, which we discussed back in Lecture 24's case study. Bacillus species, rods that form spores, covered in Lecture 34. Their spores survive heat and disinfection, which makes them a genuinely different kind of control challenge. Clostridium species, rods that also form spores and grow anaerobically, covered in Lecture 34 and 35. They produce some of the most potent toxins in microbiology. And Enterococcus species, cocci in chains or pairs, covered in Lecture 33. They are notably hardy organisms, which is exactly why they get used as a sanitation indicator in some programs. Notice the pattern here. Several of these gram-positive organisms form spores. That is a survival strategy that is going to matter a great deal once we get to Lecture 34. Now the gram-negative side. Salmonella species, rods, covered in Lecture 31. This is a zero-tolerance pathogen, detected through both classical culture methods and molecular methods. Escherichia coli, rods, covered in Lecture 30. Most strains function as a coliform indicator organism, but the O157H7 strain specifically is a severe pathogen in its own right, and Pseudomonas species, rods, referenced across this level rather than getting its own dedicated lecture. It is one of the most common water system contaminants you will encounter, and it is a notorious biofilm former. Here's a preview worth holding onto. Lecture 27 covers the so-called Big Six foodborne pathogens as a group, and you will see both gram-positive and gram-negative organisms on that list. Knowing the gram reaction of each one ahead of time is going to make it much easier to understand why each is detected and controlled in a different way. Let's pull today's lecture together into one comparison table. Peptidoglycan layer, thick, 20 to 80 nanometers, a single layer, for gram-positive. Thin, 2 to 3 nanometers, sandwiched between two membranes, for gram-negative. Outer membrane, absent in gram-positive organisms. Present in gram-negative organisms, and that is exactly where the LPS, the endotoxin, sits. Stain result: purple or violet for gram-positive, pink or red for gram-negative. Decolorization behavior: gram-positive resists decolorization. Gram-negative decolorizes quickly, which is the entire basis of the test. General resistance profile: gram-positive organisms are generally more susceptible to penicillin-class antibiotics. Gram-negative organisms are generally more resistant, because that outer membrane acts as an extra barrier, and QC relevant examples: Staphylococcus aureus, Listeria, Bacillus, and Enterococcus on the gram-positive side. Salmonella, E. coli, and Pseudomonas on the gram-negative side. Keep this table in your head. Every organism we name for the rest of this level fits into one of these two columns. Before we close, let's go through where gram stain results actually go wrong in practice. The first mistake is over-decolorizing. Leaving the alcohol on too long washes crystal violet out of gram-positive cells too, and they falsely read as gram-negative. The second mistake is under-decolorizing. Too little alcohol time leaves gram-negative cells still holding on to some purple, and they falsely read as gram-positive. The third mistake is using an old culture. Gram-positive organisms older than roughly 24 hours can start losing their true reaction and staying gram-variable, showing a mix of purple and pink cells that has nothing to do with contamination. The fourth mistake is treating the result as a final identification. The gram stain is a screening and triage tool. It is not a species-level identification on its own. Confirmatory testing still has to follow. And the fifth mistake is ignoring mixed results within a single field. Seeing both purple and pink cells together in one field very often signals a contaminated culture, not a single organism that happens to have mixed properties. Do not explain that away. Let's bring this lecture to a close with the key takeaways. Number 1. The gram stain still runs first on almost every unknown isolate because it is fast, cheap, and it immediately narrows down the organism. Number 2. The color difference comes directly from the cell wall. Thick peptidoglycan holds the purple dye, while an outer membrane in gram-negative organisms lets that dye wash out. Number 3. The 5-step procedure hinges on one moment, the decolorization step. Getting that timing right is what makes the whole test reliable. Number 4. Gram-negative organisms carry LPS, endotoxin, on their outer membrane, which is a real risk specifically in sterile and parenteral pharmaceutical products. Number 5. That same outer membrane makes many gram-negative organisms genuinely harder to kill with standard disinfectants and antibiotics. Number 6. The gram reaction is often an investigation's first clue. Gram-negatives often trace back to water, gram-positives often trace back to personnel. That is Lecture 26 complete, and you can now actually read a gram stain. You know what causes the purple versus pink result, how to run and time the procedure correctly, and why that one difference shapes everything from endotoxin risk, to disinfectant choice, to which direction you point an investigation. Up next is Lecture 27, Pathogenic Microorganisms in Food, the Big Six. That lecture brings together everything we have covered so far, because you will recognize both gram-positive and gram-negative organisms on that list, and you will already understand why each behaves differently. Take a look at the roadmap on this slide. Lectures 24 and 25 are done. We are wrapping up Lecture 26 right now, and 9 more lectures remain, building towards specific named pathogens. If this lecture helped you, please give it a like. Subscribe for new lectures every week. And drop your questions in the comments, they get read and answered. See you in Lecture 27.